So this is a slightly different talk in that I'm not going to talk about what happened during the First World War, but I'm talking more about what we're doing now to learn about it and recreate the allotment slightly. So War and Peas is based in Glasgow, in one of the very large city parks in Glasgow called Pollock Park. And Julie just mentioned that the parks had demonstration plots so that people could go and see what they needed to do on a weekly basis. So that's what we're trying to recreate. So those demonstration plots were really important, I think, because we didn't have Monty Don telling us what we needed to do on the weekend on a Friday night. We might have had radio advice. I think we probably did, but that would have been national. So it was really good to have local advice that you could pick up on as well, especially in Glasgow. So I noticed when I arrived last night that there's lots of spring flowers out here that I haven't seen yet, so I've been sneezing quite a bit as well. So the idea of the project is to get people thinking about the kind of issues that have been spoken about today. So I'm going to have lots of interesting things to go home and tell the volunteers about. But it's just to get people to think about what life was like on the home front and what you could have done to be able to grow your own food and supplement your diet, and how inventive you might have had to have been with cooking in ways that you weren't before. We're also thinking not just about the First World War, but the impact that allotments have had afterwards. So I think for the government, allotments have very often been a sort of short-timed response to a crisis. So in the First World War, they were a quick response, and the councils were very quick to close them again afterwards and use the land for housing and schools. And the same thing happened in the Second World War. Allotment holders have a very different view to that. And they might have been just new allotment holders in the First World War, but they quickly became attached to them as their land, and it was a place for them to go. And the allotment movement also became quite conscious of the mental health aspects of having an allotment and how it could improve both your physical and mental health. And they really wanted to get soldiers that were returning to the war into having their own allotments. So there was a project in Scotland for blind soldiers to start gardening. So we're looking at that as well. We're also looking at how allotments aren't just sustainable for people, but they're also sustainable for plants and animals. So allotments are a way of keeping types of crop that have gone out of fashion commercially going, and they've also become very important places for animals in the city. So they're particularly good places for bees, and they're also very good places for amphibians that like to stay in the same place and not move around too much. So I was very excited this week because we've now got tadpoles on our site. So the one thing that we're cheating massively, because we're trying to look after the animals on our site as well, is that we're an organic project, which would not have been the case during the First World War. I don't think we'd even be allowed to touch the chemicals that they were using then, so we're staying away from all of that. And the main outcomes of the project are that we've got a website that I'll show on the last slide that I keep updating so you can see what we've been up to, and we'll have an exhibition in the main Glasgow library in November. We're also going to produce a recipe book, so it can be inspired by the lunch we had today. So the project's developed as a sister project to a larger project in Pollock Park called Digging In, and this is reconstructions of the trenches. So we have a British trench, and then no man's land in the middle, and then the German trench. The German trench is the one with this lovely wicker work that the volunteers have been learning how to do. So it's to give people an idea of what life was like in the trenches, and it's been especially important for the schools in Glasgow, particularly the ones that are in the poorer areas and can't afford to take the children to France. It means they have somewhere to go and see the trenches. I moved to Glasgow in 2013, and then this project started in 2014. I moved to do a PhD on allotments, so then I visited this site and said, oh, you have a lot of space. What do you think about maybe having a First World War allotment in there as well? So I was quite lucky that they thought that that was a good idea, and it's come about. And we're also working with the Glasgow Allotments Forum, who are quite keen to celebrate that there's 6 allotment sites in the city that are celebrating their centenary this year. So it's giving us a chance to have a sort of big birthday year for them. But it also means we can investigate what's happened to the allotments that have disappeared. So those 6 are the surviving 6 from 1917 of 32 sites that were created. So we need to look at why they disappeared, even though people in a few cases definitely really wanted to keep them, and then see what lessons from those closures we can apply today. So I'm helped by volunteers in running the allotment, and they come every Wednesday afternoon and Friday morning, and they're a mixture of people. So quite a few of them are retired, a few of them have recently been made redundant and they're volunteering while they work out what they want to do next. Some of them are students that are either doing it as a placement as part of their course, or they want to get outside for a little while, especially while the exam period's on, I think. So we're really lucky that we're gathering this group together. A lot of them are men. We've got very few women, which I was quite surprised at, because my experience of community projects in the past is that it tends to go the other way, so not quite sure why that is. As well as the volunteers that come regularly, we've also been having workshops, and they tend to attract the people that actually have allotments. So we don't see many people that have allotments because I think they feel like they've got enough going on already without helping someone else. But we've had a sort of how to compost workshop, a history of potatoes workshop, and that's when they come as well. So there's a bit of a mixture of people that dip in and out of different things. As far as possible, we're trying to grow things on the site that would have been grown during the First World War. So with potatoes, this has been really quite easy. So there's been a kind of rise in the last few years in interest in heritage potatoes, and you get potato days all around the UK where people can go and buy seed potatoes that you might not get in a garden centre. So we're growing 7 types of potatoes on the allotment, 6 of which were around during the First World War, and 1, Arran Victory, was bred and then named for the end of the war by potato breeders on Arran. The Arran Victory potato is bred to have a very dark blue skin. So I think they felt it was quite patriotic in Scotland to have this blue potato, but it just failed commercially because the farmers couldn't spot it in the ground, because when it's dirty it's blue and brown, so you can't see it. So that's an example of one of the potatoes that allotmenters and home gardeners keep going, because they've got the time to root around and look for these blue potatoes. The seeds have been a bit more difficult. So I think there's been less interest in heritage variety of seeds and more interest in pest-resistant types of crop, and ones that give a lot of produce. So a few are around still, but not many. I'm also not sure how many. I've kind of lost track of varieties that are still around, but they've changed name. So sometimes you can see the name changes because they keep them in the seed catalogues, and other times they've gone. So I'm not quite sure what's happening there. I need to find a seed expert to talk to. I also found out when I was trying to look into what was being grown that gardeners were asked to grow plants for medicine. So we were very reliant on the German pharmaceutical industry, which we were then cut off from as well. So anyone with an allotment or a garden was asked to grow foxgloves for digitalis and poppies for opium. And children were asked to go out into the countryside and gather these things up and make a bit of extra pocket money. So we've got a medicine bed as well. And the one crop that people are always very shocked by is that we're growing garlic. And no one believes that we could have been growing garlic in 1918. But we were, and it turns up in May Byron's cookbook. And so we were definitely eating it, but we were also using it as an antibiotic. So before we had penicillin, we were using garlic. So I had a very stinky day making garlic poultices with children to show them how that would have been used, and my hands smelt for 3 days. So that's been good fun. The children that come to the site, we've done one specific workshop for kids with frog life that was more about growing flowers. And I'm trying to set up a gardening club where children can come once a week, but we'll see how that goes as the weather gets better, because a lot of parents haven't been happy for their children to be on site for too long in the snow. The children we get regularly are coming on school trips, and so they circulate between the trenches and the plots. The problem for me is that the trenches are much more exciting than vegetable beds that you can't really see anything growing in at the moment anyway, and they're either hyped up because they've been in the trenches or they're too excited to go to the trenches. So the activity that I've been doing with them mostly is, because when I was looking into how the seeds were named, I noticed that the names kind of come and go with fashion. So I came across a few lettuces that have been named for Barnum's performers. So we still have Tom Thumb lettuce today, that's one that survived. There was a Peter Pan pea that was named about the time that G.M. Barrie published his book. So one of the things I like to talk to the kids about is, if you're marketing your seeds, how are you going to make it attractive to someone that has never grown vegetables before, and you need to get them to do it. So we have a little competition with them where they think of a marketing pitch for how they're going to sell their vegetable, and we split them into the pea team, the carrot team and the potato team. I tell them they're allowed to lie, because it's about propaganda as well, so they can exaggerate the qualities, and they all know that carrots don't really make you see in the dark now, but some of them say that their grandparents did think that that was true. So we talk about how propaganda was used in the war, and is that okay or is that not okay, or how far should we be doing that? Usually they name the vegetables after musicians or footballers, so we've had Pele's potatoes. My favourite ones have been the black-eyed peas that make your voice sound auto-tuned for several weeks after eating. And we've had the Kim Kardashian carrots, who help you grow a big bottom, but you have to talk to them very motivationally, otherwise they won't grow. And without fail, every group has had a Donald Trump carrot. And he's the most accurate looking Donald Trump carrot that there has been. And they come up with some very odd instructions for that, like building walls around your carrots, and they're generally to make you strong and powerful. But I think it's quite an interesting insight into what the children are thinking about, and although there's quite a lot of joking about Donald Trump, I kind of get the feeling that they're a bit uneasy about politics at the moment, and it's kind of affecting them. We haven't had any produce yet, and it might be some way to come in the future. But when we do have crops, the idea is that the volunteers will be able to take it home, hopefully enjoy it, and try out some First World War recipes. A lot of the volunteers tell me that they don't actually eat vegetables, so it's going to be interesting whether they feel like they can if they've grown them or not. So the recipes that we've been trying out so far have mostly been quite cake based, because there haven't really been any vegetables ready to try. So we've been making a lot of things with potatoes in, where potatoes wouldn't usually be going. So potato pastry mince pies was one of my favourites. That was okay. And one of the things that I've been kind of concerned with over the last few weeks is that although the weather's been terrible and you wouldn't think that people would be happy in this situation, it's been a very fun project so far. And I think we sometimes get a bit of a sense on the project that maybe it shouldn't be fun, because it's a serious thing that we're doing, and we should be thinking more about what it was like at the time. And this was quite a big discussion when we were doing the branding for the project as well, that War and Peas was already quite a playful name. Should we be making the branding a bit more serious? But then in the end we came up with this pea tank, and I think it's all right, because I think that there's even if you're in a very awful time, there's only so long your mind can focus on it. and people need something that make them laugh, and I think this is why the allotments lasted after the war as well, because they became a place that people went to feel happy and feel better. And I think that's having a similar effect on some of the volunteers now. So I didn't really want to talk about my volunteers because I don't think I have a right to talk about them. So I've got Gordon Hankin, who's been a volunteer from the beginning, to write a statement for me that I'm going to read out. So Gordon says, "A year ago last February, I took an earlier than planned retirement, and with all the new spare time now on my hands, I started looking for things to volunteer for to fill up my week. I did have some ideas about what I had in mind. Firstly, it had to be something I was interested in, and not just doing it for the sake of doing it. It had to involve physical manual labour to keep me fit, as I'd spent the last 37 years sitting behind a desk. It had to involve interaction with other people, and finally, if it was educational as well, that would be a bonus. By luck, I found the advert looking for volunteers for digging in at Pollock Park, maintaining the trenches, and that ticked all the boxes, especially the interest in learning aspects, as I have family history with World War I. It was through digging in that I met Hannah, as she was just starting on her War and Peace allotments, and I volunteered to help on that as well. Working on the allotments can be, and usually is, very physical work, just what I was looking for, and I have been learning quite a bit about planting vegetables, tending allotments, etc. I have no history at all with gardening or working on allotments, having lived in flatted premises since I was 5 years old, so this is all totally new to me. It's not just learning about working on the allotments though, it's also been an opportunity to learn more about the history of allotments during World War I and history of vegetables, for instance potatoes, the many varieties and the evolution of the different types. I have found it rewarding and even enjoying it enough to be out in all weathers without complaint, and Gordon hasn't complained at all, he's amazing, and it's been quite a winter. I am looking forward to seeing the results of our endeavours in the coming months and also what further I can learn from it. So that's Gordon's experience. So this is, I haven't put the website up, but you can find it if you Google War and Peas allotments, it should come up. If you just Google War and Peas, you get someone's comics instead, which are very funny, but not our project. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been really good to be here today. Yep.
Well, just one question. I know about York Archaeology Trust, and I know about Glasgow, and I know about allotments. I'm still not quite working out what the connection is, why you're still based at York Archaeology Trust.
That's the name for the entire company. So the Trust have recently taken over 3 regional offices. So there's one in Glasgow, one in Sheffield and one in Nottingham. Usually with archaeological companies, they keep the same name everywhere. So you get Wessex Archaeology in Edinburgh and Oxford Archaeology in Lancaster. The York Trust made the decision that the offices should have a regional name, just so it had some regional identity, so that's why, but it does make talking about it very confusing. So there's pros and cons to that system.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think Hamp's the site been finished?
No, it's we're not sure. No. It should be closing in November. A lot of people want to keep the trenches, especially the schools, but it's council land, so it depends on the council and depends on where the funding would come from. So, yeah.
I just wondered how it was funded.
The Heritage Lottery Fund. Yeah.
I know you said that you have to wait and see whether the kids will eat the stuff that they've grown, but have you had any indications that they're keen on that idea or not keen on?
The kids are brilliant at eating vegetables, it's the adults that are the problem. So when the children come with school, the first question I ask them is who ate a vegetable yesterday, and they all put their hand up and I say who enjoyed it, and they nearly all keep their hands up. And a lot of them are doing growing projects at school, so they're very used to it. Whereas the adult volunteers I get just eat potatoes and they'll say they're very often in the form of chips. So that's the,
Do they eat them raw? Or they cook them? I have a grandson who's always going around our allotments and eating everything raw.
Yeah.
Just one place to do that.
Yeah, a lot of allotment holders lose their produce to their grandchildren, I think. Yeah.
In researching the varieties that they would have grown in 1914-20, have you been using our seed catalogues, and if so, which ones were they?
I haven't really. My seed research ended up being in a very big rush. So the idea was that it should have happened with the volunteers, and we would have done it over the winter because that's the time you'd usually do that. What actually happened was that I broke my arm and was signed off work for the whole of January. So I lost that time and ended up doing it in a bit of a rush. So that's not as I'd have liked it to have been. But the Tomasetti seed website is very helpful. So they're quite a small seed company, but they're trying to keep varieties going, and they have a lovely section of resources on their website of old catalogues and like lists that would have been available at different times. I think it was Sutton Seeds have a blog where they've written about flowers that were grown in the First World War, which is really nice because I think they can get forgotten, but actually there were people that were really keen to keep growing flowers even though they were meant to be growing food. And I got a lot of help from two people. So there's Sandra Eder, who has an allotment project in Bromley, and George Gilchrist, who has he's a horticultural lecturer in Oakridge, which is in the Lothians. So they were very kind and gave me some help. But yeah, I think it's being able to track the names that is difficult. And I was quite keen on doing it because I think allotments are a place where you can grow varieties that are falling out of use. So, so the popular one in Scotland is the Musselburgh leek, which only has its white bit that you want to use, ends up being quite stunted, and it grows really well on Scottish allotments because it can stand the weather. But commercially it's not that good because it's kind of tiny. So it's good to keep these varieties going, I think.
Do you grow King Edward potatoes?
Yes, I think we have got King Edward potatoes, but when I was researching them, there was a bit of a concern that they were maybe a bit too English, and I should have some Scottish ones as well. So I've got Kerr's Pink, so the big Ayrshire potato, I think, to grow. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.